All right. Practical strategy for digital organizations, or how to relate your objectives and key results to your technical real estate. How are we feeling, everyone? Roughly midway into the conference. How are the excitement levels? How's the overload? Yeah? All right. So at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to produce a Wardley map for the existing objectives and key results of your organization. Now, if your organization isn't using objectives and key results yet, then you might be able to use a Wardley map to spot objectives that are worthwhile to pursue. Now, when you map, you graph your dependencies. And if you do this with a diverse group of people from various disciplines, then you'll be able to articulate why some of your higher level objectives are limited by constraints within your value chain and the systems that support it. Now, I'm convinced that with that newfound situational awareness, you're going to be far more effective at implementing your strategy. So my job is done here today. If at the end of this, you're as excited as I am about trying these ideas in your own environment. Now, I want to invite you to talk to me at the end of this presentation if you came here just to hear about objectives and key results, or if you were only here because you're interested in Wardley Maps. Because this talk is really about combining these two things together. But rest assured, I'm going to cover the basics of both of these topics. Unfortunately for you, though, I'll do this using corny visual metaphors. So, my name is Marijn Huizendveld, and I work with the leadership teams at fast-growing organizations, mostly scale-ups, but sometimes corporates, that have decided that they want to own more of the software production system. And most of my clients ask me a question along the lines of, what can we do to improve or regain our effectiveness now that we have significantly increased in size? We used to get so much done here, but now that we're a tenfold of people or just a double, all of a sudden everything seems to slow down. So a while ago, I was at a conference like this, and I was speaking to somebody and they were asking me at what level I operate when I work with my clients. Now, I found it an interesting question, but also an amusing one, because it assumes that we have a shared understanding of what levels exist. So what I told this person is that in order to be effective, I think that an organization needs to possess tactical skills, right? And well, we're at a software conference here, so what does that mean? Well, I come from the domain-driven design community, and so I think it's very important that you have people in the team that understand how they can learn about the domain that they're working in from experts and build up a shared understanding and a shared language to express the complexity, the essential complexity of the domain that they're working in, and to turn that into useful models that can power their software system. I think these teams need the ability to hide the complexity of working with some kind of legacy system behind an interface, so that when the team is working on this, they don't get bogged down with technical details, but that they can focus on the business problem at hand. It is about being able to refactor very effectively. Now let's imagine that the team possesses these and many more skills that are needed in order to be effective in a software organization. You could say that the team is able to march very effectively, but perhaps they're headed off in the wrong direction and they are walking off a cliff. So we need more than just these tactical skills, right? We need a clear understanding of where we're going and why we're going there. And also, why aren't we going somewhere else, right? We have choice. And this is why, besides the tactical skills, we need strategy, right? We need a vision. We need to understand why we're going somewhere and why we're not going somewhere else instead. And this is what strategy provides us. But just the act of a vision and the tactical skills alone aren't enough, right? Because we need to organize effectively around this strategy in order to turn our tactical ability into a strategic success, right? If we have one team trying to accomplish the goal by going off in that direction and another team trying to accomplish the goal by going into that direction, guess where we're going? And so I could say you need 3 levels to operate on, right? First of all, tactical skills. Second, a strategic vision. And third, an operational model to turn those strategies into reality, right? Now, the story that I'll be sharing with you today is the story of me playing around with a strategy that was handed to me by a client and allowing myself to, play in the sandbox, if you will. All right, let's get started. Strategy. It's a big word, right? But what does it really mean? Well, imagine that we're on the road to success, this beautiful road to success. And we're cruising along, everything is going great. And at some point in time, a team member shouts, "Wait, stop! I think I saw a pot of gold." Now what do? Do you go down the road to success? Or is this perhaps the point where we have to pivot? Because, well, let's be honest, we just struck upon gold. So strategy helps us to interpret the environment and the events that happen in it. And it allows us to say, this thing that just happened, is it a mere distraction? Or is this something that we need to take very seriously? Or as Simon Wardley puts it, strategy is about observing the landscape, understanding how that landscape is changing, and then using whatever resources we have, however little or however many they may be, right, to maximize our chances of success. This is the photo moment. All right. So it acts as a lens, right, to observe the landscape. So the organization that I was working with, they used objectives and key results as a way to perceive the environment and to communicate about it. Now, objectives and key results stands for, the objective, a big and audacious goal, right, that gets people jumping out of bed in the morning, right? This is why they've joined this organization. They're excited about what we're trying to accomplish, right? It is aspirational, right? It is qualitative. It is something that differentiates, right? And key results, they are the metrics, right? They are the performance indicators that tell us we have actually achieved our qualitative goal, right? So the key result is really something quantitative, right? It informs us that we have, in fact, reached our objective. Now, there is a silent H in OKRs. It's actually OKR HMS, but that doesn't really roll off the tongue very nicely. And so this is once said by Christina Wodke, and it is really, the H is about health metrics, right? You could imagine that if you give a team a big audacious goal and you say, focus on this and this alone, and these are the metrics that will inform you that you're there, then the team might be burning some bridges that we don't want to be burning. They might be sacrificing some assets that would be difficult to recoup later. And so, health metrics are the things that inform us that we're not sacrificing these types of assets that will be difficult to recoup. And this is important, right? Because you can mess up trying to achieve your goals many times, but your health, you can mess up only once. So let's look at an objective. Are you ready? Finish the Phoenix Project. I'm not talking about the book here. What do you think? Is this a good objective? Depends on the context. Good. The it depends answer. Always good. Right. So finish the Phoenix Project is not a great objective. And the reason for it is that objectives need to communicate an outcome and not an output. But finishing the Phoenix Project is like make this feature, right? Or launch this app, or make this plan. It is output and it is not the goal that we're trying to achieve. So when we're trying to set an objective, we want to think about the why behind the thing that we're doing. Because when we do that, then we're giving the team effectively the choice over the implementation, right? We allow them to figure out what is the best way to actually achieve user growth or whatever it is that we're after. So Objectives are about outcome, not about output. All right, let's go on a little case here. Let's imagine that we work for the likes of Gorillas, Getir, or Flink, right? One of these organizations that earlier on in this decade started to think, you know what, consumers are lazy. Why don't we give them groceries within 10 minutes, right? You can order through an app or a website, and within 10 minutes, a handsome biker is going to arrive with your groceries, and you don't no longer have to go to the supermarket to buy, well, what is most likely really convenience products like Ben and Jerry's ice cream. So imagine that we're working for Shopee Floppy, right? The competitor of these. And we're launching into a new market every time. And so we've spent a lot of resources getting the right people, getting these dark stores. So we want to make sure that this outcome that we're after, right, a successful launch, is really, people are really rallying around it. So we organize a workshop together with the people that are going to work in this market, and we figure out what our objective is, right? We make sure that the language we capture it in is really the language that gets the team excited. And so this team has chosen catapult ourselves into the market of everyday items as their objective, right? This is something that gets them jumping out of bed. Well, what would be the key results? Well, key results would be revenue of 1.2 million krona 30 days after launch, right? Or 15% of customers refer friends and family. And of course, 250 reviews at least, of which 80% is 4 out of 5 stars, right? These are very clear and crisp goals that are measurable and understandable. And they inform us that we have actually catapulted ourselves into that market. All right. But what about those numbers, right? The problem with these numbers is that quite often they are not completely objective, right? Quite often we have to perform a self-assessment. We have to use numbers that live in our organization. So it's kind of like, you will decide your own grades. I see. You passed all your exams. So when we are doing these things, we have to make sure that we're very transparent about which numbers we're using and how we're using them, so that people in the organization can challenge us if we've actually picked a number with which we're not lying to ourselves. Let's talk about some health metrics. So a great health metric, I find, is team happiness. In this case, 3 out of 3, right? We spend a lot of money recruiting all of these people. It doesn't make sense to catapult ourselves into a market only to then find out that half our team is burned out. We want to make sure that the cost of acquisition is less or equal to the average order profit, because otherwise people might start to give away free groceries to grow customers. But yeah, if you're going to give away free stuff, of course you're going to have customers, right? And finally, we want to make sure that the cash flow in exceeds the cash flow out. Because let's face it, the only reason why businesses go out of business is because they run out of money. So these are some helpful health metrics that make sure that you're not sacrificing anything important. Now, there's some common pitfalls with objectives and key results. My first and favorite is set and forget. That's a typical timescale for objectives and key results is a quarter, but it could be any kind of cadence that your organization is already on, right? Some organizations cut the year up in 3 pieces, some in 6. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that it's short enough that you get quick feedback, but long enough that people can make a meaningful impact. But let's say that we've chosen a quarter, right? And we organize a workshop. We have a great objective. Everybody's excited about it, right? Cheering for it even. We've gotten great key results. People were challenging the numbers that we picked. We made sure that we prevent the self-assessment bias. And now the next day rolls around and it's business as usual. And the next day it's business as usual. And it continues for another 12 Mondays up until the end of the quarter has arrived. And we wonder why we haven't made our objectives and key results. OKRs are a great focusing mechanism, but unless you're really going to use that mechanism to focus, nothing's going to change other than having an understanding of what you wanted to achieve. So make sure that you have a cadence to check in and to see if you're actually focused and to stop doing things that are not related to your goal or to keeping your health metrics in check. One of the common failures is a lack of ambition. Imagine that you're working for an organization where failure is punished, right? If you fail, you get punished. Now, that might seem like a smart thing to do from a managerial perspective, right? We don't want to fail. But if you punish it too much, then people will never aim for the moon, right? Because, hey, punishment is no fun. And so as a consequence, we keep on sort of aiming too low, and therefore we keep on underperforming. Now, I had a startup in online ticketing, and we usually suffered from the opposite. We usually thought we could take on the entire world. Or, let me put it different, we weren't aiming for the moon, we were aiming for Mars. As a consequence, we never really achieved the objectives. And that can get really, really down, right? Because if you never achieve the high of accomplishing something that seemed very daunting up front, then these types of techniques aren't going to help you. So overly ambitious is really an anti-pattern. What we also want to make sure of is that the team has autonomy over what they're trying to do. This relates to output or outcome. If we tell the team to finish a feature or to build an app, they don't have a lot of autonomy on how to do things, right? They have to navigate within the close confines of what we've already defined. But if we set a clear outcome objective, then the team has a lot of choice on how to implement, and that's where the benefit comes from. So make sure that the team has sufficient room to navigate the landscape. And finally, not a business goal. This usually happens when we take an organization and we take all of the projects and turn them into OKRs. That doesn't really work. Then you get something like, let's replace, some Amazon message delivery platform with Kafka. And although that might be a worthwhile project, it's not necessarily something that is going to make a big dent in your business proposition, unless you're able to connect it to one of the problems that you have. So make sure that you have a clear business goal. All right. Now, one of the favorite ways to deal with that lack of cadence and some of these problems, right, set and forget, is by having a simple status email. And here's an example of it, right? It's a simple email. It just lists sort of the main key results, and it has a few simple visual cues to clearly express, hey, how confident are we that we're going to make these key results? What are some of the risks and blockers that we foresee? And what are the things that we're working on next week, right? What are our main priorities? By being transparent and by sending this to everyone, we can make sure that we don't fall victim to the set and forget thing. We can ask the organization for help with risks and blockers. This is not about pushing away our responsibility for the objective, but rather for inviting help. Now, if you're going to be transparent and send this to anyone, and I literally mean anyone, it is going to get you in trouble. And I know this because I speak from experience. I had an initiative where I was involved in, and somebody from sales came up to me and said, "Oh, that's interesting. Can you add me to the list?" And sure, I did. And then this person started to completely weaponize all of the information that was shared in these emails because he thought, hey, we're spending an amount of money over here, but I think we're far more effective way of spending that money would be over here. Now, this person went about it in a really aggressive and unfun way, and therefore it wasn't a pleasant experience for the team. Nevertheless, I do invite it on principle because this makes sure, right, that we're spending our resources in a way where we're getting the most back for what we're doing, right? So I encourage you to do this, but beware of the dragons. So in short, I love OKRs when done right. And done right means an objective that inspires and aims for the moon. Key results that are measurable and that don't lie. They're not sensitive to the self-assessment bias. Having health metrics to prevent us from burning bridges that we don't want to be burning. And of course, a status email to ensure that we have cadence and that the organization understands what we're doing so that we're not making a train wreck. Back to my client. Here it is, our strategy. It's a 17-sheet long presentation, font size 9, no pictures. A few, but very small ones. Who has seen one like that? A few hands go up. You're lucky. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was reading through it, and you know, you know when you're reading something and you get like your mind wanders off and you start over again, and like after 2 minutes it happened again and you start over. Like, I thought, here's what I want to do with that presentation. Oh no, not like that, not like that. Like this. If you look at things from a different angle, you might see something else, right? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to relate what I was reading in that document, that strategy, to what I was seeing on the shop floor, because these two worlds did not match up, right? These objectives and key results and what I was noticing that teams were doing, I couldn't really connect the dots yet. But before we go into that, have you ever had that you were walking around in Malmö and some tourists came up to you and they say like, hey, could you tell me the way to Ribbesburger Kalpathaus? And sorry for the pronunciation. and your phone is empty or you don't have it with you. Well, it was probably empty, right? Who doesn't have a phone with them these days? But your phone is empty and you're like, yeah, of course, follow the road here. And then the third to the left, then the second to the right, keep on walking, the roundabout left, and then you should see it. And they walk away and you already feel the stone in your stomach, like, wait a minute. Or was the fourth to the left and then the third to the right? Stories are a terrible, terrible way to communicate about an environment and how to navigate in that environment, right? Maybe you gave them a good instruction, but maybe there was an obstacle on the way. And as a consequence of that, they were still not able to find their way, right? And the problem with the stories is they don't scale in a fast-growing organization because you have to tell the story over and over and over again, and every story is new, and you only get the value of the story if you hear the story all the way until the end. There's no way that this stuff is valuable in part. And so this doesn't really work very well. So tell me, you have to go somewhere. What are the first apps that you open on your smartphone? Maps, all right. What else? What did you say? Oh, a traffic app. Exactly. Yes. Well, I was expecting, we're in Sweden here. I'm from the Netherlands. Probably to hear the weather app too, but all right. But regardless, right? These apps, they provide you with situational awareness. They allow you to inspect the environment and to base your decisions, your strategy upon them, right? Let's look at a map and let's look at what makes a map, according to Simon Wardley, right? So we're looking at a map here, and well, first thing of a map is visual, right? We can look at it and it immediately starts to draw up a mental image. It has context, right? This is not a map of the entire history of the entire world, but rather about a specific part in Greece at a specific point in time relating to a specific historic battle. So it has context, right? It doesn't try to answer all navigation questions in life throughout the course of humanity, but it's about the specific point in time at a specific location. It has position, right? I can point at things on the map and they correspond to a location in the landscape. And if I point somewhere else, it corresponds with a different location in the landscape. And the reason for that is that all of these things are positioned in relationship towards of an anchor, right? The anchor in most geographical maps is the magnetic north, right? The thing we see in the top right corner. And in most maps these days, it's sort of implied, but that's what provides us with position on the map. The map also shows movement, right? The red arrows. We can talk about how we can move in the landscape. And with that, we can start to anticipate. And finally, we have components. What kind of components do we see on the map here? Cities, mountains, water, land. Yeah, land is always the last one, right? The fish are always the last to notice the ocean. So we see different components, right? So we see what the landscape is composed of. So Simon Wardley started to think about what could a map for business look like, right? That adheres to these principles, right? A map that is visual, has context, right? It allows us to discuss position, it has an anchor, we can talk about movement, and we can think in terms of components. And he started with a principle in mind, and that principle is know your users. Quite a lot of projects embark on their mission without understanding who their users are, right? And the second principle that he took into account when starting this is focusing on the user need, not want, need, right? What is it that we're doing for this user that they need? So let's go back to our case, Shoppy Floppy. It starts with our user, right? The lazy person, the couch potato who wants to sit home on the couch, watch Netflix and chill with a bucket of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So what do they need? They need to consume everyday items. Well, what do we need for that? Well, we need urgency, right? You wouldn't order with Shoppy Floppy unless you need it right now. Otherwise, you could just order with a regular grocery store, or you could, add it to the shopping list and get it sometime later. What else do we need? Well, the Shoppy Floppy offering. What do we need for that? Well, we need a catalog. What do we need for that? We need everyday items. What do we need for that? Well, pricing and suppliers. And so as we progress, as we ask, what do you need? What do you need for that? What do you need for that? We're starting to build up a chain of needs, or perhaps a value chain, right? We're starting to understand how that value that we're delivering to the lazy person is composed of all of these components lower in the stack. The further we're away from that user, the less they're able to perceive it. Do you think the lazy person cares if we got this bucket of Ben & Jerry's from one supplier or another? Everything that's far away becomes very difficult to perceive for the user. All right. Now, we operate in a capitalistic society. And so as a consequence of that, we have a climatic pattern. And that climatic pattern is that everything evolves. Imagine it's the 60s and we're a fly on the wall at Bell Laboratories, and a person comes driving in with an object the size of a fridge, and they park it in the middle of the boardroom. They take the cigarette out of their mouth. They say, "Here it is, a mobile phone." And everybody in the boardroom goes like, "Wait, what?" And they look at it. It's held together by rope. There is a lead battery attached to it, right? It looks appalling. It's not at all mobile, right? How is this a mobile phone? Well, it's not connected to the landline, but it demonstrates the concept, right? There's key codes on it. You can punch them. You can call your mother, but who would want to buy this? And so let's roll forward another 10 years, right? Initially, we have something, the genesis of something new, where we're saying, wow, can we do this as humanity? But who on earth would want to buy this? We can't really imagine a customer for it. And then 10 years later, the US Army, having bought custom-built telephones for their generals to call one another, right? I don't know if they're going to be talking strategy or beers, but who knows, right? We have one customer for this product of mobile telecommunications, and if the Royal Army of Sweden would come along, we would have to do it all over again, right? Because probably other frequencies would be necessary here than in the USA, and we'd be on a different voltage system, and so we'd have to build the whole thing all over again, right? So we're custom building this thing. Now let's roll forward another 10 years, and it's the 80s, right? Every Wall Street trader has one of those big suitcases. It's a productized thing now, right? It's a mobile phone. It has a mass market, although the market is perhaps rather big already. It's not completely standardized yet, right? There's different providers. There's different competing standards. And then roll forward another 10 years, that thing that was productized in the 80s has now been completely commoditized, right? If you're my age, you had a Nokia 3210 in your pocket, which you used to call your mom to say that you weren't coming home, right? Everybody has now, at the end of the 90s, has a mobile phone, right? It's become completely expected. Whether you use one or another doesn't matter. It's standardized. Everyone is on GSM. And so the expectations of this product are completely different, right? It needs to be always on. And so something that is commoditized, right, like the tap water, the electricity, or the cloud these days, if that's going down, we're all in big trouble, right? We have very different expectations from that than from a product. And so we can put our chain of needs on this axis of evolution, right? We can say this particular component is evolved to this extent. Now, what do you notice if you look at this map? You do not need to understand the domain to start to ask some really annoying questions when you are able to read a Wardley map. Because remember, things that were far away from the user, they were difficult to perceive, right? But if we're custom building something, then we hope to gain a lot of value out of that, right? Because custom building is expensive, right? So why is that pricing component custom built if it's this far away from the user, right? What benefit does that bring? And if somebody starts to compete with us and they can buy this in the market as a product, right, they're going to be far more effective because they're doing less stuff themselves, right? Now, that doesn't always mean that you should always address everything in the bottom part of the map, because moving things to the right in the map, right, from custom build to product or from product to commodity, you could spend millions and decades on that in certain organizations. So what we want to do is we want to balance doing stuff in the bottom part of the map and doing stuff in the top part of the map. In the top part of the map, we make sure that we remain competitive in the market, and in the bottom part of the map, we ensure that we can remain competitive in the future by not being held hostage by our ecosystem. You see that everyday items thing has a different notation. It's sort of a pipeline. You can imagine that to be an ore, right? It's composed of different types of components. So this map is from 2020. Eggs and coffee are obviously very accepted products, right? But we also started to experiment with selling COVID tests in a single branch, right? So that's why it's in custom build, to figure out if there is actually an appetite for that particular product to be bought. But the seller of the test actually informed us that there's also the possibility to buy HIV tests from them, and we're considering if we want to add those to our offering. So this is how we can visualize these things, right? We can make it very explicit what type of components we have and whether they are composed of other things or if there may be a set of different. So how do we make a map? We frame our purpose, right? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? We determine the scope of the question. We identify our user. We list their relevant needs. I've only shown you one. We identify the components below that. And then finally, we put those components on the axis of evolution. Now, if we Wardley map our ecosystem, we can make our assumptions explicit. And that allows people to challenge the strategy. Right? People in different roles are able to say, I don't think this is really going to work because of this particular reason. It allows us to ask that annoying question that salesperson was asking in the initiative that I was involved in. Why are we spending money over here if we could also be spending it over there? And if we're organizing our people, you could imagine that somebody that has to custom build something needs to have a very different mindset from somebody that has to squeeze every last bit of performance out of commoditizing something. So we can figure out like who the right people are to work on a particular component. And we can also find an appropriate process to work, right? If you're in Genesis, I can assure you that Scrum is not going to be the best way to figure out this next best thing, right? That is way too restrictive. And if you're in commodity, that is probably also not a really good fit. And finally, we can visualize our risk and impact, right? We can show our value chain. And as we've seen in 2020, many organizations didn't understand their own value chains and therefore didn't understand what risks they were exposed to when the global economy started to perform very different. All right, great, OKRs and Wardley Maps, but wasn't this talk about combining them? Let's do that. So here we are. On the top left, Shoppy Floppy, an anchor on the map. We're in Genesis because we are burning VC money like no one else has seen before, right? And below that is our objective, right? Catapulting ourselves into that market, right? It's in custom build because we come up with new objectives every quarter. And below that is one of my key results, right? That I'm trying to influence. This team thinks that they need to have a high average order value, right? And below that is a hypothesis, right, that the team is trying to trying to work on, right? They think that the perception of value of the product is wrong, right? And therefore, the team thinks they want to work on price communication, right? Expressing what the price of a particular product is. They particularly want to do this with strike-through pricing, you know? This bucket of Ben & Jerry's ice cream normally cost 69 kroner, but now it costs 49 with a clear strike-through. But now somebody in the team says, yes, but for that to work, we need to play around with the pricing microservice. And you haven't seen this thing. It is no fun to work there. That's never going to work in 12 months. However, now that I understand that we want to do something with the high average order value, here's what I think we can do instead. And now the team is able to provide an alternative approach to achieving this outcome, right? And this is the value of doing this. Connecting your higher level objectives to those constraints within your value chain. All right. Now, if we're doing this, we can start to visualize how we're making progress, right? So if our hypothesis starts to become accepted, we can move it more towards the right to communicate the progress that we're making as we're moving along. And we can also talk about any inertia that we're experiencing, right? If we're evolving things, then what happens usually is some parts of the organization aren't really tremendously excited about it, whether that's systems or people or processes. Things can bog us down and we can visualize that. And that allows us to point at the map rather than at each other. Now, maybe Genesis, custom built product, commodity feels a bit weird as labels for a hypothesis. So you could use another set of labels. This is one that I find particularly compelling to use when we're talking about a hypothesis, from novel, divergent, convergent, and accepted. All right, so OKRs and Wardley Maps. The department and tribes of teams, they can be anchors on the map, right? And objectives can be the needs of the actor. And then below that, and we can put the hypothesis, and as proof accumulates, we can move the hypothesis towards the right. We can visualize the inertia that inhibits reaching the objective. And finally, the map acts as a vehicle to point out organizational bias, right? We have this component in custom build, but the rest of the market has it in product or even in commodity. And so at some point in time, one of our competitors is going to have our lunch, right? The hypothesis can be a set of components, right, in a pipeline, because probably in order to achieve a key result, you'll have many hypotheses that you want to test. And so there can be many that can be visualized if you'd want to. So there's an important thing to consider when you're attending a conference like this. And that is, don't take what everyone says at a conference at face value. This is Dennis Doman who said it, who's also speaking at this conference. I want to show you a real map that inspired this talk, right? Because examples have to be simple, but this is what the reality looked like. All right, this is how far I had to go, starting from those objectives, in order to reach those microservices that teams were working on, and other types of things, other types of stacks in the organization. And in the top left, you see a bunch of questions that I asked, and some of them have answers, and some of them don't. And that meant that I was able to decide, there is a strategy, but I don't think it's a strategy that is founded upon the principles that are going to be reality in this market. I think people underestimate the forces at play, and therefore, although this makes sense if you look just at the organization itself, looking at it from a broader market perspective, I don't think this is a project with a lot of chances for success. And so not everything is going to be rainbows and unicorns and butterflies, right? The map itself won't tell you what to do. The map will just allow you to structure your thinking and to make your own decisions. So how does this all relate to software design? Well, mapping will help us build up a common language. And when we have a common language, we have far more effective communication about making changes to our landscape. When we're map, we think in abstractions, right? And we can teach the rest of the business to think in abstractions that work within the software reality. And finally, mapping will help us focus on the user needs, right? Because I have to start with that user. And it's not about wants, right? The user wants a faster horse, right? But they need a car. And of course, mapping will help us differentiate our approach, right? We can talk about how what good enough looks like in a particular part of the map. Looking back and into the future, how to make OKRs work. An objective should inspire and it should aim for the moon. We want to measure key results that indicate success. And we want to frequently evaluate the lack of progress or the existence of progress so that we can course correct if needed. And we combine OKRs with Wardley Maps to have a single picture for both the business strategy and the technical strategy, right? We're making changes in our software landscape because we're trying to accomplish a particular outcome, right? And we can connect the dots between the two. It allows us to uncover the assumptions below a hypothesis, right? This is why you want to do something with strike-through pricing. You think there is a problem with the perception of value. It makes it easier to challenge the strategy for both people in the top, right? Why are you doing all of these things in these software systems? Or the other way around, right? Why are you trying to accomplish the goal this way if this would be a far easier way to implement the same thing? It allows us to unify the language between tech and non-tech roles. And we can share knowledge within the organization as we keep on doing this and as we keep progressing. And finally, to clarify a preference over one alternative in relationship to another. I want to thank Simon Wardley for his work on Wardley Maps and Christina Wodke for her lovely works on objectives and key results. If you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend finding these people online and reading their material. If you liked this presentation, then tell your friends, tell your boss, and tell the internet. I wish you a very pleasant conference, and let me know if you apply any of this. Have a good day. And finally, if you want to get in contact, if you take the time to write a good question, I'll take the time to write a good answer.